Hello, everyone. First of all, would you turn off your cell phones if you happen to have them on? Good evening. My name is Anita Olson. I am one of the trustees of the Winchester Academy. Tonight, we are in our Summers 2021 series. We'd like to take a moment to thank the City of Wapaka and Durant Popple. He's off doing his helpful work for us, who's providing the space and technology to bring this program to you. Our next program is in 1 week. Ken and Barb Wardias will be presenting Wisconsin lighthouses. This program is perfect for anyone interested in lighthouses, maritime history, or simply breathtaking photography. That's on Monday, July 19th, and the program will be back to just virtual. Tonight's program is sponsored by Pat Hollenbeck, who is here in the studio with us, so we thank you, Pat. We'll have a question and answer session following Laura's presentation tonight. Questions may be submitted via the Facebook live site or by telephone. So the number is 715-942-9917. I'm going to say that again, 715-942-9917. Our speaker tonight is Laura Fiser. Since 2005, Laura has been serving as a curator of collections and exhibitions at the Paine Art Center and Gardens in Oshkosh, where she oversees the museum's art and archive collections and manages a dynamic program of ever-changing exhibits. She received a BA from Davidson College in North Carolina and an MA in art history from the University of Cincinnati. Before joining the Paine, Laura managed exhibitions at the Speed Art Museum in Louisville, Kentucky, and she has worked in curatorial and educational departments at the Cincinnati Art Museum and at North Carolina's Museum of Art. Laura, we welcome you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me here tonight. It is my pleasure to be back at Winchester Academy for the 4th time. So I have talked with this group and community about Louis Comfort Tiffany, Frederick Remington, Dale Chihuly, and now the world of footwear from the private collection of Stuart Weitzman. And I love the variety of topics that I've had the opportunity and pleasure to speak with you all about. And it's a really telling example of what I get to do at the Paine Art Center and Gardens in Oshkosh. It's an ever-changing job, never the same day twice, and I get to be a jack of all trades and learn about such a variety of topics. So it's a fantastic exhibition that I'm talking about with you tonight, and I hope that you take the opportunity to go to Oshkosh and see it in person, because the images just don't do it justice. And it's a really exciting show for us, something we've never done before, is show footwear. We've had fashion shows and jewelry shows, but now our focus is downward. So Walk This Way features more than 100 pairs of sensational shoes from the personal collection of iconic shoe designer Stuart Weitzman. So I will clarify that these are not all shoes. In fact, it's rare in my presentation to see shoes designed by Weitzman himself. I do have a little backdrop behind me of some Weitzman designed shoes, and we'll touch on that at the end. But most of these are shoes that are in Weitzman's personal collection. You can think of them as antique shoes, some more antique than others, or as inspiration shoes that he has collected over many years. So over the past few decades, this extensive collection of inspiration shoes has been assembled by Stuart Weitzman and his wife, businesswoman and philanthropist Jane Gershon Weitzman. The couple began collecting more than 30 years ago when Jane gave Stuart a pair of antique shoes as a gift. He's the man who has everything, and she grew tired of giving him ties at every occasion, so she started giving him shoes. There you can see the couple. holding some of their shoes and modeling some of his shoes. The collection grew and grew through gift and purchase. Weitzman's passion for footwear extends to collecting exceptional historic examples, ranging from a pair of simple satin wedding shoes worn in 1838 to platform sandals of the 1970s. They collect mostly American and European examples, pre-Civil War through the 1980s for the most part, and have well over 300, if not 400 pairs of shoes. Shoes serve as inspiration, examples of design artistry or superior construction or innovative use of materials. But most of all, they are collected by the Weitzmans for the stories that they tell. Stories about the clients, the designers, and the time period when they were created and worn. Walk This Way considers the story of the shoe from the perspectives of collection, consumption, production, and presentation. As Weitzman himself has expressed, these extraordinary antique shoes, which span several centuries and countries, tell an almost infinite number of stories. Stories of conformity and independence, culture and class, politics and performance. So the collection also gives us an insider's view into their eye for originality, their eye for refined aesthetics, and their insider's innate sense of what makes a successful shoe design. The exhibition, Walk This Way, is a traveling exhibition organized by the New York Historical Society, where it was on view in fall of 2018. And incidentally, the New York Historical Society is actually the oldest museum in New York City, established in 1804. And this exhibition was organized by the museum in conjunction with their Center for Women's History. So it's a very interesting look at kind of the politics of shoes and the consumption and design of shoes, particularly from a women's standpoint. The exhibition explores how shoes have transcended their utilitarian purpose to become representations of culture, coveted as objects of desire, designed with artistic consideration, and expressing complex meanings of femininity, power, and aspiration for women and men alike. Through these unique artifacts, the exhibition examines trends in American economic history as well, from industrialization to the rise of consumer culture, with a focus on women's contributions as producers, consumers, designers, and entrepreneurs. Highlights include a pair of pink silk embroidered boudoir shoes created for the 1867 Paris Universal Exposition, and a pair of elegant heels designed by Salvatore Ferragamo for actress Sophia Loren in the 1950s. The exhibition also includes Weitzman's own showstopper that you see here in the center image, the so-called $1 Million Sandal, originally designed in 2002 by Weitzman himself for a debut on the Oscars red carpet. So I'll tell you a little bit about Stuart Weitzman himself, in case you are not familiar with his name. At the Paine, amongst our staff and volunteers, I would say it was about a half and half. About half the audience had heard of Weitzman and half had not. So we'll talk a little bit about his background. There's a really cute image of him on the left here as a little boy, shown with his father, Seymour Weitzman. Remember that name because it's important a little later in the talk. But Stuart was born in 1941, and he's an American shoe designer, entrepreneur, and founder of the shoe company Stuart Weitzman, a world-renowned upscale brand for both celebrities and everyday women, if you're willing to spend a little bit. He has designed shoes for such stars as Beyoncé, Taylor Swift, also Kate Middleton, and many more high-profile clients. Weitzman got into the shoe industry at a young age, working at his father's Massachusetts shoe factory while still in college at the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania. Weitzman reflected on his beginnings in the shoe industry. He said, "In 1961, I took a seat next to my father in his Haverhill, Massachusetts factory. He wanted me to learn the art of his business, designing exceptional shoes for women. I was a sophomore at the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School and had grand plans about heading to Wall Street. The first time he showed me how to carve a heel, Dad changed my mind and my life forever." Later, Stuart ran the family business with his brother, and in 1986, he struck out on his own, launching his company under the Stuart Weitzman brand. And it's an international brand with stores all over the world. There he is in the lower right at one of his shoe factories. He makes a lot of shoes overseas in Spain and Italy, or used to. He's now retired. But there are some of the storefronts around the world, New York, Chicago, but also Milan. This one is in Rome and shows the design by Zaha Hadid, a renowned architect who passed away a few years ago, taking inspiration from the ergonomic and organic forms of shoe design for the design of the store itself. So Stuart Weitzman stores are seen all over the world. He is known for using unique materials and for creating designs that are elegant, beautiful, and ultimately well-constructed and supposedly more comfortable than they look. He acknowledges that many of the designs in his personal collection of historic shoes look particularly uncomfortable, and that the majority of women's shoes in the past have indeed been designed by men. Many of these designs, he has stated, gorgeous as they are, have inspired me to rethink the notion that pain and fashion must be faithful partners. In 2015, handbag maker Coach acquired the Stuart Weitzman business for $574 million, but kept Weitzman on as creative director, according to Forbes magazine. Weitzman continued in that role until his ultimate retirement in 2018, coincidentally, just as this exhibition came to be. So this exhibition came to be, I believe, because the president of the board of the New York Historical Society and around 2016 knew Stuart Weitzman, and Stuart Weitzman approached that board member and said, "Hey, I've got this kind of eccentric collection of shoes. Do you think it could ever be an exhibition?" And that was the impetus. And the show is accompanied by a beautiful publication as well, the exhibition catalog. And interestingly, one of the co-curators of the show is Edward Mader, and he's originally from Wisconsin and has worked as a fashion historian for over 50 years. And he put in at least 200 to 300 hours of conservation work on these shoes to get them ready for the exhibition, because shoes are often worn. And so they're not always in pristine condition, and also readying them for display. So when you see a really strappy sandal and the straps are not flopping on the deck of the case, that's thanks to the work of Edward Mader and the team at the New York Historical Society, getting them so-called show ready. So here we have that $1 million sandal for which Stuart Weitzman is so well known. I will say that the example we have on view at the Paine, the one that travels, is a replica. The original, I believe, was disassembled because the diamonds were so valuable. But for the 2002 Oscars, actress Laura Elena Herring of the movie Mulholland Drive wore a pair of Stuart Weitzman stilettos ornamented with 464 Kwiat diamonds. These, nicknamed $1 million sandals, inspired the installation of a shoe-level camera on the red carpet, shifting fashion's gaze decidedly footward. The designer also issued the famous shoes with more affordable Swarovski crystals, as you see here. And for the red carpet story, Stuart Weitzman wrote, "The $1 million sandal altered the trajectory of my business in 2002 when it earned so much global recognition. I designed the sandal to be irresistible to any red carpet interviewer because attention then was not being paid to shoes at the Academy Awards. Commentators would ask stars about their dresses, their hair, their jewelry. I felt it was time to draw some attention to their footwear. Today, the question, 'Who are you wearing?' is one that can rightly be asked from head to toe." So we'll go through some chronological, roughly, highlights of the exhibition and the Weitzman collection of historic shoes. I will note that when you think about shoes and the fact that they're on display or in a collection, whether it's a public collection or a private collection like the Weitzmans, most shoes are, in fact, worn out or discarded. They might be thrown away. They might be donated if they were highly uncomfortable and unwearable once you tried wearing them for more than 5 minutes in the store. Those that remain are so-called accidents of survival. So even fewer of the shoes that actually survive the test of time are collected and then preserved in public or private collections. So it's really remarkable that you can build a kind of museum-quality exhibition around a shoe collection. The exception is the Bata Shoe Museum in Toronto, and Edward Mader, the co-curator of this exhibition, was the founding director of the Bata Shoe Museum for a number of years. If you visit the exhibition in person, you will note that a lot of these shoes are incredibly small. Yes, foot sizes were probably smaller, but also these are the shoes that survive. Maybe these were not super well worn. Maybe some of them were samples. The ones that look particularly pristine might have been those tiny little samples on display in a shoe salon and a department store and never really worn. So perhaps they were too uncomfortable to be worn much and thus survived. But you'll notice that they are not only very petite in length, but also very narrow. So these beautiful wedding slippers, deceptively simple with the little ties. They were wedding shoes from 1838. Unidentified maker, worn in Newark, New Jersey, and made of silk, so very, very fragile. Caroline Howard wore this very simple pair of satin shoes for her October 2nd, 1838 marriage to Reverend Thomas Marsh Clark, who later became the Bishop of Rhode Island. Similar footwear was reserved for the most formal evening occasions and preserved as keepsakes after being worn only once or twice. Like most early 19th century shoes of this period, these have straight soles. They're nicknamed straights, which were easier and cheaper to make than crooked-soled shoes, which differentiated left from right. So these would have been interchangeable. They probably ended up picking which was left and which was right, but they were considered straights. And those are the earliest shoes in the Weitzman collection. So you can see that shoes like this would have been barely visible from underneath floor-length gowns. And you can see an example from a Thomas Sully, American painter, example from 1840, so roughly the same time period. And this was also the time when carpets were just being produced and used on wooden floors in upper-class homes so that the soles would not have been worn out as easily if they had just been bare wood soles. This beautiful pair of boudoir shoes I mentioned earlier, these were created especially made by hand for the Paris Universal Exposition of 1867. The soles are stamped with the exhibition seal, and although this particular World's Fair focused on industrial production, these shoes were made and embroidered by hand. During the age of European imperial expansion, Western consumers clamored for for exotic textiles, such as the Turkish gilt thread embroidery seen on these shoes. And these boudoir shoes also would have been indoor shoes like the satin ones. These would not have been worn outside of the home. But you can see there's a medal. That's the seal that's on the bottom of the shoe, but we also have the medal from the fair on view because that was the emblem. They were inspired by Turkish boudoir shoes of the 18th century and earlier, even Ottoman Empire shoes. And also heels prior to this time period were mostly worn by men, such as Louis XIV, the Sun King. You see here in a painting by Rigaud, and he was a little bit short of stature, so he would wear heels to emphasize his height and thus convey his power. That's a very famous painting from the Louvre. And the theme of Orientalism and exotic textiles from Turkey, Morocco, ancient Egypt, this was all very much the rage in the 19th century at the time of that 1867 Paris Universal Exposition. People had a real taste for the East and exotic cultures and the rich interiors. Industrialization and mechanization, these are themes represented. There are over, I think, 35 cases of shoes in the exhibition, well over 100 pairs, and they are broken down into different themes. And this particular theme is very interesting. These boots were made in the 1870s, and one of the first American industries to embrace large-scale mechanization was the footwear industry. It soon grew into one of America's largest industries. By 1850, shoemaking was America's second largest industry, following only agriculture. These particular shoes reflect Victorian fashions, long, wide skirts. Boots may have developed as a way to preserve modesty. If you look here at a fashion plate from the same time period on the right-hand side, the skirts were very wide, had the hoops underneath. They would often have to lift their skirts to get through doorways, and thus the horrors of exposing an ankle. So the women would mostly wear boots so that their ankles would not be exposed. And even the children, you can see her skirt is higher than the adults, but she also is wearing boots because it would have been inappropriate to show anything that was kind of in close proximity to the foot. Slipper chairs. I'm showing this example on the left-hand side in this slide. That slipper chair is upstairs in the Paine's guest bedroom. It dates from the Victorian period and was an antique owned either by the Paine or Kimberly family. And it was a low chair called a slipper chair that eased the women in putting on their boots. It was low, and they could sit close to their boots and deal with all of those buttons or hooks or laces. From the previous image, you can imagine that would take quite some time to get your shoe on. And they also used the little shoe horns. And our dresser set in the same bedroom, the dresser set, the silver mirror and brush and comb belonging to Mrs. Paine. She also had a silver engraved shoe horn to help with her shoes. These are a pretty phenomenal pair of lace-up boots from about 1900. They are silk brocade, very, very fragile but gorgeous. The late 1800s saw the introduction of machines capable of mimicking even the most intricate handmade shoemaking processes and producing high-quality shoes. By 1900, nearly every American shoe was made in a mechanized factory rather than being handmade. Also by 1900, 1/3 of the workers in American shoe factories were women. So 1/3 were women. That's a pretty amazing statistic. This was at a time when women made up less than 20% of the total industrial workforce. So the shoe industry was a really important one for women. Women were also active in the labor movement. As early as 1868, they had organized the first national union of working women. It was the Daughters of St. Crispin, named for the patron saint of shoemakers. Shoes also reflect the women's rights movement. Here we have a buttoned shoe from about 1915, leather beads and buttons, and a small stamp on the sole of this shoe bears the mark of the International Boot and Shoe Workers Union, which was established in 1895. By 1904, the Shoe Worker Union's constitution called for, quote, uniform wages for the same class of work, regardless of sex. By 1908, Mary Anderson of Chicago had been elected to the General Executive Board of this Shoe Workers Union. She later served as the first head of the Women's Bureau in the U.S. Department of Labor. There's a section devoted to the new woman, or a case, I should say, but this new woman is reflected in several cases of shoes in the exhibition. The first decades of the 20th century witnessed a revolution in the way women dressed, moved, and behaved in public. As the floor-length gowns of the late 1800s gave way to the shorter skirts and slim silhouettes of the Jazz Age, women's feet and legs became a new focal point. The new woman of the era was more complex than the flapper stereotype would lead us to believe. Independent and spirited, by night she danced in beaded shoes that glittered under the lights of urban cabarets, but by day she played sports, went to college, entered the workforce, and marched for suffrage. An example from that case, shown up close, is this gorgeous D'Orsay evening shoe, about 1928. There are several examples of these D'Orsay-style evening shoes, featuring silk brocade with kid leather, rhinestones, beads. You have the beautiful rhinestones and metallic ornamentation. Very elegant, would have looked beautiful in those nightclubs that were inspired by Prohibition and the dance movement. Truly gorgeous. Women's suffrage is also an incredibly important theme in this exhibition. You can see those high-top buckled shoes down in the lower right. They were absolutely fierce. A lot of shoes. They look incredibly contemporary today. You could certainly see designs by some of the most prominent designers reflecting the women's suffrage movement. But these shoes allowed them to go out into the streets and march for their rights. It was an incredibly important time for women, and you can see that the ankles are now being exposed in that vintage photograph. Really fantastic. Dance was another incredibly important theme that was reflected in both fashion and footwear. The ragtime, Charleston, foxtrot, tango, all of those dances were incredibly popular in the nightclubs and speakeasies that thrived during Prohibition, and dance became an integral part of that dynamic nightlife. By 1910, here's a beautiful shoe from around that period, 1912, the ragtime music and dances created by African Americans and working class Americans had become mainstream to the white American middle class. Manufacturers produced evening shoes in a very limited range of colors in the 1910s and decorated with intricate beading to complement new clothing styles. Buttoned straps, such as the ones you see here, or sometimes the crisscross design, would secure the shoes while women danced the wildly popular tango or the very vivacious Charleston. So they needed to keep the shoes on. That was very important, but they also needed to be elegant and fashionable and heavily ornamented. Here's another example with that crisscross design. Also, the beads that were used, it says gold beads. Copper beads are also very prominent during this time period. Really beautiful and very hard to find today in terms of restoration to get a hold of all of those beads. Here's a really beautiful example, one of my favorite pairs in the exhibition, peep-toe ankle strap shoes from about 1930, made of silk and still surviving today, even though they're so fragile. During the 1920s, as these hemlines gradually rose from ankle to knee, the shoe trade, which had long been dependent on just a few staple styles and colors, exploded in a host of new colors, materials, and patterns. And beginning with this shoe on through the decades, you'll start to see color becoming much more important and innovative use of materials. You can see this type of shoe design reflected in sheet music from the same time period. So it's interesting to see how footwear may seem just very isolated to a choice of what one wears on the feet, but it really reflects the fashions, the music, the art of the day, and the politics too. Here's a vintage photograph of those rising hemlines of Charleston dance champions. It was in the New York Daily News in 1926. Charleston champions invade New York. And you can see their bobbed hair and the hats that they really love to wear and an array of shoes and proudly showing off not just ankles and calves, but knees as well. Department stores and window shoppings are an important aspect of shoe design. Here we see a pair of shoes by Fenton Footwear, pumps from the late 1920s. I could swear my grandmother, who was born in the 1890s, had a pair of these Fenton shoes. They look just like this. I could just picture them on Mima's feet. She was such an elegant lady. And a church organist, and always wore heels and always wore dresses. But these are silk, metallic fabric, and kid leather. Department stores, the advent of the department store helped change the way women occupied urban space, such as New York. But also Chicago. The evolution of upscale retail districts, such as New York's famous so-called Ladies' Mile on 6th Avenue, offered a safe, well-lit place for leisure, pleasure, and refreshment, where affluent women could socialize without the need for a chaperone. So department stores this time became very important. They also, Fenton was a leading maker at Saks Fifth Avenue. They had a whole Fenton display at the Saks store when it opened in the flagship store in New York, which opened in 1924. But department stores also offered not just a place for affluent women to go and have moments of leisure unchaperoned, but they also offered new employment opportunities for saleswomen, buyers, and in a few cases, even executives. In 1934, Hortense Odlum became the first woman to head a major fashion retailer when she became president of Bonwit Teller, and she would be followed by Dorothy Shaver at Lord & Taylor and Geraldine or Jerry Stutz at Henry Bendel. And these are phenomenal shoes. The T-strap pumps, also made by Fenton, like in the previous slide, from the 1930s, velveteen and leather. Looks so modern and wearable today. As do this pair, purple and chartreuse, peep-toe slingback evening shoes, showing that advent of more color options that's really taking hold in the 1930s in particular. And it's interesting to see these vibrant shoes playing out even in the midst of the Depression years and, approaching World War II. These shoes, another very high-end pair featuring embroidery from China that was then sent to the shoe factory and made into these elegant ankle strap sandals from the 1930s. Window shopping was also a relatively new phenomenon. Shop windows had been a prominent feature of the American streetscape since 1900, when the introduction of glass windows divided the retail experience according to class. Working class people could look at the enticing products on display, but many of them continued to buy from push carts or sidewalk stalls well into the 20th century. Until the 1920s, access to the glassed-in goods required a degree of affluence. So it was sort of the have-nots on the outside and the haves happily shopping on the inside. I. Miller was a very important store founded in 1895 in New York. They were the maker of this particular shoe, the white linen shoe, extremely fragile. I can't imagine wanting a pair of white linen shoes, but you get the feeling that the woman who may have worn these would not have been walking around the dirty streets of New York too much. She would have been delivered from doorstop to doorstop by car, by chauffeur. But they have a really wonderful cutout design. Cutouts were starting to become more prevalent in both shoe design and fashion in the 1930s, and you certainly see that a lot today in fashion. So all of these fashions kind of come back into play. I. Miller was named for Israel Miller, a Jewish shoemaker from Eastern Europe who apprenticed under John Azamonti, an Italian immigrant who in the 1880s was New York's leading maker of high-end footwear for celebrities and socialites. In 1895, Israel Miller founded I. Miller and Sons, which by 1929 was an $8 million company with factories in Massachusetts, Brooklyn, and Long Island City, had 16 retail shops and over 200 franchises. So it was a huge company. These might be my favorite pair in the exhibition. I think they're absolutely exquisite and really fun and whimsical, and shows the kind of how designs in art and architecture from the period really make their presence known in footwear and fashion from the day. These are Delman shoes, a company that was founded in 1919. They're called Peep Toe Evening Shoes. I nickname them the spiderweb shoes. They are leather and mesh net, and the theme of the spiderweb is shown throughout the shoe. So even on the side, opposite the buckle, the inside ankle side, and also on the back of the heel. Really extraordinary shoes, and they really reflect, Art Deco, but mostly Art Nouveau, inspiration from nature. So these turn-of-the-century art movements continued to play out into the 1920s and even 1930s when these were made. And the spider web was certainly an inspiration. Floral motifs were very common, and other botanical themes, but the spider web and love of insects could be seen in jewelry, also in Tiffany lamp designs, and many, many other makers. So Tiffany very famously said, "Nature is always beautiful." And so you see that a lot in the beautiful spiderweb shoe. Art Deco design, emerging from France in the 1920s and gaining international popularity prior to World War II. The style, now known as Art Deco, signaled modernity and luxury and influenced everything from skyscrapers to shoes. Influenced by avant-garde art movements like Cubism and Futurism, Art Deco designs featured geometric shapes, stylized patterns, flat planes of bright color, and metallic accents. With skirts rising from ankle to knee height, shoes were designed to sparkle and catch the eye. So these are a beautiful Art Deco-inspired design, T-strap shoes with the silk satin, kid leather, mother-of-pearl button, And then this incredible array of Art Deco heels is included in the exhibition. So these would have been interchangeable heels. You would buy a pair of shoes and you could slot out the heel and then slide in one of these designs if you bought a set of them. They're really remarkable and so beautiful. It's hard to pick a favorite in the bunch. We also have a few so-called celebrity shoes or shoes that had a brush with celebrity in the exhibition. These are unidentified maker spectator pumps, but they were made remarkable when they were signed by the Yankees in 1941. Leather and suede spectator pumps, we believe, got their name from, they were inspired by menswear, men's shoes, and they got their name from watching as a spectator sports such as golf or cricket and the like. These shoes were signed by 27 members of the 1941 Yankees team. They are thought to have belonged to baseball legend Joe DiMaggio's one-time girlfriend, not his wife, identified only as the A1 girl fan of the Yanks. The autographs from the World Series winning team, including future Hall of Famers Red Ruffing and Lefty Gomez, changed a pair of everyday pumps into a one-of-a-kind piece of baseball memorabilia. So pretty remarkable pair of shoes there. Another pair of spectator pumps. They came in all shapes and sizes. These are the peep toe version of a spectator pump from the same time period, early 1940s. American-born divorcee Wallace Warfield Simpson became world famous in 1936 when King Edward VIII abdicated the British throne to marry her. Consumers who wished to emulate the globe-trotting aristocrat could order a similar pair of spectator pumps from the Sears Roebuck catalog for an affordable $2.19. And there is Wallace wearing her spectator pumps, and everyone wanted to look like her. But spectator pumps dated from even earlier. In the women's suffrage case, here's a pair from 1915, beautiful leather pair of spectator pumps that a suffragette would have worn. These open-toe mules, 1950s, these belong to Ginger Rogers. I cannot imagine she would have actually danced in mules. If you look very closely at the vintage photograph of her dancing, she always had a strap on her shoe, but these did belong to her. And they feature a spring-a-later, which I will talk about. But the Oscar-winning film star and partner of Fred Astaire starred in Depression-era and later romantic musicals, and these were her shoes. In 1935, the duo starred in both Roberta and the wildly successful Top Hat, setting Rogers on her way to becoming America's highest-paid woman. These mules, or open-foot, strapless in the back shoes, just slip on, feature the innovation called the spring-a-later, a strip of elastic tape in the sole that helped the shoes adhere to the wearer's feet. Because mules, you have a really hard time kind of squinching up your foot to try to hold it on, or it makes that awful smacking sound when you walk. So the spring-a-later was a very important design. It was popularized by a designer we'll see in a little bit called Beth Levine, and she was known as the first lady of shoe design. Another similar pair featuring a very fun, whimsical design out of plastic and lucite with it's sort of a grape motif. Another example, also featuring the spring-a-later, and you can see it. It's just that little silver flap inside the shoe, and it's elasticized to keep it in place a little better on the foot. And then these phenomenal shoes designed by Ferragamo for Sophia Loren. Ferragamo's rise to success began with his work for the American Film Company, and then after World War II, Ferragamo rebuilt his star-studded clientele, making custom shoes for Marilyn Monroe, Greta Garbo, Katharine Hepburn, Marlene Dietrich, and the Duchess of Windsor. This design, which features handmade Needlepoint lace from Tuscany was originally created for Italian actress Sophia Loren. During World War II, Ferragamo, so prior to these shoes, actually developed wedge shoes made out of cork. You can see an example in that Vogue cover from the World War II period. And then there's an image of Carmen Miranda, who popularized the wedge shoe. So materials were very scarce. Leather was being used for jackets for troops. Metals could not be used because they were going to the war effort. So with the restriction on materials, they started using woven rope for heels, and cork is what Ferragamo used to develop the wedge sandal, which I am modeling today, but not in cork form. But they were made very popular during the war years and are kind of make a comeback every few decades. And Carmen Miranda, I should have pointed out, she was just 5 feet tall, apparently. So she needed the platform sandal to give her a little extra height as a performer. We also have a lot of shoes inspired by film, so not just art and architecture, but film. In the late 1940s and 50s, epic films such as Samson and Delilah and Salome and The Prodigal allowed Hollywood costume designers to dodge the restrictive production code of 1930. This production code included rules against nudity and semi-nudity in films produced in Hollywood. But biblical temptresses and Roman empresses defied the code's prohibition against semi-nudity on the grounds of historical accuracy and inspired a fashion for metallic, strappy sandals such as these of the 1940s. Here you can see Hedy Lamarr and Samson and Delilah wearing a pair of metallic sandals. Rita Hayworth and Salome, 1953, also wearing some strappy metallic sandals and not a whole lot else. But they inspired so many evening sandals from that period. So these by Palter DeLizzo, featuring leather and rhinestones, very, very contemporary and could be worn today. And then these, the Delman shoes, evening sandals, beautifully strapped and kind of rigid for display. It's an intricate wiring system that Edward created to make sure that these were picture perfect. And then the 1960s and 70s, once we get into that time period, we really see a love of flower power and sort of whimsical design. Also, you get a sense of kind of upheaval and rebellion in these shoes, and also innovation. A lot of interesting materials are being used during this particular time period. So these shoes were manufactured in Haverhill, Massachusetts at a factory owned by Seymour Weitzman. So his company was called Mr. Seymour, after his first name, founded in the 1950s. And he was the shoe designer and father of Stuart Weitzman. And Massachusetts was the earliest center of large-scale shoe production in the United States. There were just tons of shoemakers in Massachusetts. And the pointed toe and the spiky heel really gained momentum in the 1960s. Another pair by Mr. Weitzman, suede and a little lace-up gross-grain ribbon. The pointy heel, this is also the space age. You get a sense of terrific design with these, and anything goes in terms of color and inspiration. Shoes, like clothes, have the shape-shifting ability to reflect each decade's zeitgeist. So you really get that feeling of the 60s and 70s, but also you got that in the 20s and the 30s. So they're really showing the art, the culture of the time, the politics of the time, and footwear. Here, peep-toe platform shoes. These, once the rage for the platform sandal had kind of fizzled out in the 40s, it gained momentum again in the 1970s. Beautiful pair of thong sandals, a lot of fun, probably the most whimsical shoes in the exhibition from the 1960s, made in Italy. These shoes by David Evans. He was very innovative in shoe design. These were plastic and were very well known. He had these column heels, which he had a patent on. They became very popular. He had very fashionable yet functional shoes for flight attendants in the mid-1950s, and they inspired chic professional women to take notice. And as more and more middle-class women entered the workforce, appropriately styled shoes became part of their business attire, and his comfortable, relatively speaking, low-heeled suit shoes made him the working woman's go-to brand. You can see here he developed a patent for his column heels. The Art of Being a Beautiful Heel by David Evans. It's an I. Miller ad from a magazine of the day. And then here, an ad from Kaufman's in Pittsburgh, in the Pittsburgh newspaper, 1967, says, David Evans devotes a column to heels gleaming in gold or silver plate. Watch Evans for the unexpected, the beautifully bizarre in shoes. So a true appreciation of interesting design. These platform disco shoes from the 1970s were designed by Terry de Havilland. Celebrities from Marlene Dietrich to dancer Carmen Miranda popularized platform shoes in the late 1930s and 1940s. By the 70s, platforms were back in fashion for both women and men. The glam rock London shoemaker Terry de Havilland, this designer, provided high-heeled shoes for gender-bending performers, including David Bowie and Tim Curry in the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Also, the First Lady of Footwear, Beth Levine, has a section devoted to her work. She was the first successful female shoe designer in an era and field dominated by men. Around 1949, Beth and her husband started a shoe factory in New York where she designed shoes under his name, Herbert Levine. She was responsible for the artistry, and he was to handle the selling and the business details. Finding her start as a shoe model, Beth Levine was uniquely suited to understanding the needs of women's shoes and was known for the comfort, wearability, and beauty of her designs. Both practical and whimsical, she is credited with more than 100,000 different shoe designs. So you see innovative materials like the lucite, the kabuki platform shoes that are suede and wood, but then the elegant evening mules. Those were kind of trademarks. She was incredibly inventive, elegant, but innovative. Here's an ad that shows there is something extra in every Herbert Levine shoe, and that extra something is Beth Levine. So she was given her due credit, and everyone knew that she was the artistry behind the brand. These are one of my favorite designs by Beth Levine, incredibly elegant Shining Hour evening mules from 1958, also featuring the springolators. So she put those springolators to very good use. And she was very well known for her boots that she designed, including the go-go boots that were made famous by Nancy Sinatra's song, These Boots Are Made for Walkin' in 1966. So that was Beth Levine's kind of claim to fame, but she did a lot more than just the go-go boots for Nancy Sinatra. And then we get a few little looks at Stuart Weitzman as a designer, shown here with open-toe ankle strap evening shoes from one of his earliest independent designs from about 1972, showing how he moved production of his line over to Europe. And then one of his most famous designs, worn by Kate Moss, the 50-50 stretch boot, very famous for his boot wear. Weitzman states, "Without question, the designs I consider most basic to our brand's DNA are the ones chosen collectively by thousands of women, lawyers, doctors, teachers, artists, mothers, and daughters, who claim a favorite and loyally wear the soles out. There is nothing I love more than hearing about the wedding shoe that holds beautiful memories, the lucky pump that helped land a first job, or the stiletto that led to an especially memorable night out. So he loves them all, and it's really exciting to have his personal collection of inspiration shoes on view at the Paine. I will add that upstairs in the Paine's Gothic Gallery on the second floor, we have a special local-based collection on view. The exhibition is called Star-Studded Soles, autographed shoes courtesy of Britain's Walkover Footwear. And it features 13 cases of shoes that were worn, and most of them signed by celebrities such as Oprah Winfrey, Reese Witherspoon, Cher, Frank Sinatra. It also features a couple of pairs designed by Stuart Weitzman, worn by Jennifer Lopez and Beyonce. And when not on view at the Paine, highlights from this collection are on display at Britain's Walkover Footwear, a locally owned third-generation family business on Main Street in Oshkosh, originally established in 1927. So they started this collection when the movie Public Enemies was filmed in 2008 in Oshkosh. They needed a pair of 20s, I guess. I'm not sure when the movie was set. They needed a pair of men's shoes that were vintage, so Britain's Footwear lent the production team a pair, and in turn, the production team gave Britain's a pair of shoes worn by Johnny Depp in the film, and thus the collection was born. Here you can see custom-made shoes from Beverly Hills that were made for Frank Sinatra for when he performed in a tuxedo, and shoes worn and signed by Cher that have the appropriate amount of flair. But the fun collection also includes Packer player footwear worn in winning games, and captures our fascination with footwear, fashion, and fame. In closing, I would like to add a thank you to Joanna Smocky, who provided the beautiful display of Stuart Weitzman footwear that she once wore when she worked in Milwaukee as a businesswoman in the fashion world, and purchased at Picardy, I believe, Easy? Picardy. So you're welcome to add anything to it, but they're really extraordinary. Sure.
They're,
Oh, yeah. You can come up here, or is that one on or not? You can come up here. But she brought some really fun examples.
for reasons because of my sweetheart here, I don't wear high heels very often. These shoes also, let me get just a little. There's your. I'll pass these around. I was very involved in the arts.
Use the microphone. I'll pass, and then you talk.
Okay. Thanks.
They're gorgeous.
Thank you. I was very involved in the arts in Milwaukee, worked at the Art Museum for a number of years, and when Chris and I came back to Milwaukee from Boston, we were involved with the Art Museum in a different way, and with other art forms. Chris and I were on a number of boards, which required us to, get dressed up periodically for special occasions and things like fundraisers. And as was mentioned, all of a sudden I go blank on these things. I don't public speak anymore. I was with Carlisle, which is a fashion house designed in New York, and it was a program I was with for 18 years where we would receive samples of clothing, like 400 samples of clothing, and I'd have trunk shows 4 times a year in my home. And that required me to be dressed up because I was working, my clientele were primarily professional women. So they would come to me and I would put together wardrobes for them and then order them from New York, and these clothes were made from all over the world. Well, needless to say, even though I'm very casual today, when I was selling clothes, I was dressed up and in heels 12 hours a day. Some of these shoes I probably will never wear again because my foot has gotten longer, thanks to 3 pins in my right foot. But needless to say, they were very comfortable when I did wear them. I wasn't very hard on those shoes, as you could see. They're still pretty new looking, aren't they? But anyway, thank you for taking a look at my shoes. Thanks for bringing them. So good.
I'm going to announce the telephone number again for anybody out there in viewer land who wants to phone in a question. We have somebody standing by to take your call, 715-942-9917. Do we have any questions in our studio audience? Please step up to a microphone,
Yes.
Pat.
Oh,
Anyway,
I bet.
yeah, this is good. I just want to thank you for something I never thought of. I've had a lot of clothes passed down from relatives, well made, but no shoes. Of course, shoes are worn out.
They're just worn out.
Yeah.
The beloved pair gets worn out, like the ones I'm wearing today. I'll wear them until they completely fall apart and then have to throw them away. But
I wonder if you know the history of the pedicure, with the peep toe shoes and sandals and
Right.
whatnot. Do you know when that became a thing?
Every time I give a talk about these shoes, and this might be my 3rd or 4th time, I get a new crazy question that sends me on a little tangent of research. So now I'm going to have to learn about, pedicures and the rage for nail polish and different colors. So I'll have to learn about it. It's really fun, though. The learning never stops. So
Yeah.
I keep recommending to people to Google it. So the spectator pump was a recent question, so we looked that one up with a live audience. Someone was Googling in the audience, and then another one was the word mule. No one liked my funny guess. I had said, well, I know when I've tried to wear a mule at an exhibition and give a gallery tour, it clomped, and I sounded like a mule. Maybe that's where the name came from, but it is not. It came from, I think, a Latin word, mule, that was either related to walking or to shoes. I can't remember, but we were all laughing about my wild guess as to where mule came from. But yes, it was a Latin word.
Well, this talk brings to mind a previous talk we had on fashion history, and we were told that when skirts got shortened, the knee became sort of an erogenous zone, and women used to rouge their knees.
Oh, yes, I have heard that too. Yes, rouge the knees. So, really, yes, all sorts of things were happening at that time period. So once they started showing toes, I'm trying to think when the earliest. Well, some of those evening shoes from the 20s, I think they started showing toes pretty early, the peep toe. So I'll have to learn about that. Any other questions about the shoes or the exhibition?
Why don't you tell us how long the exhibition is going to be open and what your hours are?
Oh, sure. It's open through, let's see if I can get back to the, I don't know if I can do that without dizzying you all. So through October 10th, so a nice long run, and we'll do some public programs in the fall, in September, some further lectures, and I think Brad Britton of Britton's Walkover Footwear is going to talk about his celebrity shoe collection at some point. That'll be fun. And you can also get online, I think, and find some interviews with the Weitzmans about their collection. And the hours, we're actually open 7 days a week during the summer and fall during the course of this exhibition. So 10 to 4, 7 days a week, which is great. Well, thank you all so much for having me. It was a real pleasure to talk with you about the exhibition, and come see us in Oshkosh.
Well, thank you, Laura. That was a
Thank you.
lovely presentation.
Thank you.
Have your picture taken later. Me? Have your picture. Sit down. Yes, yes, yes. Black and brown. Just wear black and put on the brown shoes.
I had more opportunity. I was saying